Channel 4 and the Big Lottery have joined forces, putting up millions of pounds to help radical ideas tackle some of Britain's biggest issues. The Secret Millions starts next Sunday from 8. Now on 4. How little we knew about Stonehenge.
Our greatest prehistoric monument has been a mystery for centuries.
There's been so much written about Stonehenge. Every generation has come up with new ideas, some great insights, others rather nutty.
But one man believes he's found the key to unlock this puzzle. Buried beneath Stonehenge are ancient bodies. And now Professor Mike Parker Pearson and his team have been granted permission to analyze them for the first time. This program follows his groundbreaking work, an investigation that will profoundly change our understanding of Stonehenge. It will overturn the accepted view on when it was built. It will prove that the monument we know today was not the original Stonehenge. Provide compelling evidence that it once united these islands, and solve the mystery of its sudden decline. The extraordinary story of the Stonehenge dead starts in 1919. A team led by archaeologist William Hawley was digging at Britain's most famous prehistoric monument when they uncovered an outer ring of holes. These holes were harboring an astonishing secret: the remains of ancient bodies.
Hawley dug up lots of cremation burials at Stonehenge, but he didn't know what to do with them. So they were left with his assistant, put into sandbags, and his assistant buried them in 1935.
Recently, Mike Parker Pearson's team were granted special permission to recover these remains. Hawley's assistant had reburied all the bones in one single hole, and no one had excavated it since. So Mike's team were unsure of what they might find. The only clue they had was an entry in a 75-year-old notebook that the remains were reburied under a plaque.
So as we dug down into the pit, we came to a layer with a lead plug. And Hawley's assistant had had it inscribed to say, "Here are the bones of the people of Stonehenge."
But the plaque was to reveal an unwelcome surprise.
This is the worst case scenario.
Hawley's assistant had made this prehistoric detective story even harder to unravel.
We were really hoping that he was going to have put them all individually within the pit, but they were all mixed together. We realized that we were looking at a great mass of mixed up material. This was going to be a very long and difficult job to disentangle all the different fragments.
The team members painstakingly gathered the jumbled bones and took them to the lab, where they could begin the arduous process of sorting through the estimated 50,000 fragments. And this gave Mike a chance to examine the hole where they were found. Soon he came to a conclusion that would rewrite the history of Stonehenge. Britain's most iconic prehistoric monument is made up of a central ring of huge stones called sarsens, capped with lintels. And inside the ring there are smaller stones. These are known as the blue stones. It's always been thought that they were all put up at the same time, in 2500 BC. But Mike's discovery was about to prove otherwise.
What we have here is an area that's really quite smooth and flat, but it's got lots of crunched up pieces in it, whereas around it we have this blocky type of chalk.
The chalk showed signs of wear that could only have been caused by the removal of something extremely heavy.
What happens when you put a great big stone vertically into a place like this, it actually crushes the chalk so it loses its structure. It really does look as though this is going to be the position within the pit that the stone was actually placed.
So it has to have been fairly slim, narrow stones put in those holes. And at Stonehenge, there's only one candidate. It could only be the blue stones.
Mike's new evidence now put the blue stones in the same holes where the dead bodies were found. The 56 holes that surround the stone monument. Could this be coincidence? Mike didn't think so. And the clue to prove it came when the first bones were examined in the lab.
It's a small piece of bone, completely encrusted with that calcium carbonate.
So this is actually adhered to the bone from the surrounding chalky environment.
Mike deduced that the way some of the cremated bones had been crushed into the chalk of the burial hole meant that they had been put in at the same time as the blue stone. And for Mike, that was of huge significance.
I think it shows us something really important, that there's a deliberate association with somebody's remains and one of these stones. It's almost like a gravestone.
Preliminary carbon dating of the bones revealed that they were buried with the blue stones in 3000 BC. Mike had shattered yet another belief about Stonehenge. The stone monument was 500 years older than anyone had realized.
This fundamentally changed the accepted view of how we looked at Stonehenge.
Mike's evidence proved that Stonehenge, famous around the world for its unique appearance, hasn't always looked this way. In fact, it used to look like this 5,000 years ago when it was first built, before the inner ring of giant sarsen stones was put in place. A giant prehistoric cemetery. Each stone marked the graves of the people whose remains Mike and his team are now analyzing. These may have been the most important people in Stone Age Britain. So who were they? Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson has discovered evidence to prove Stonehenge was originally very different from how we know it today.
This is what Stonehenge looked like right at the beginning, 5,000 years ago.
And he has also shown that the monument began life as an immense prehistoric graveyard. So now the team need to know who were the people buried here, and why were they important enough to be honored in this way. To solve this mystery, their remains have been collected from the ground where they have lain for the last 5,000 years. A 50,000-piece prehistoric jigsaw puzzle.
They don't look like much. It's hard to even recognize some of them as bones because they're fragments that have come through the cremation process. But if you look carefully with the expert eye, you can see that they belong to different parts of the skeleton. The ribs, the vertebrae, the mandible, the skull.
The first mystery to solve is just how many bodies the team are dealing with. Osteoarchaeologist Christy Willis has already made a breakthrough that will kickstart the process.
So the bones that we have found that are most common throughout the collection are the ear bones. We have one on the left and one on the right. And because of this, we're able to prove that they are unique individuals. So this is one of the cremated ear bones here. They're quite easily identifiable, very solid, very compact bone, with a small hole in here for your inner canal.
This tiny bone will allow Mike's team to tell the individuals apart. Then the total number of bodies can be counted. Once that's done, more advanced tests can be carried out on each individual's remains. Carbon dating will provide accurate dates of death across the group, giving Mike clues about their relationship to each other. In the meantime, Mike and his colleagues are looking into a number of tantalizing possibilities regarding the identity of the Stonehenge dead. To do this, they need to widen their search. Mike's first theory is based on grisly discoveries from the Stone Age. It's hard to imagine now, but southwest England was a prehistoric battle zone in the centuries before Stonehenge was built. And there's further evidence of conflict at burial sites near to the monument. Prehistoric tombs like this one at West Kennet, 15 miles from Stonehenge, contain evidence which could shed light on the identity of the Stonehenge dead. Dr. Rick Schulting is an expert on prehistoric conflict.
This is the West Kennet Chamber tomb. We have chambers on either side of us that held the remains of the Neolithic dead. But most of the human skeletal remains that we have from the Neolithic come from long barrows like this. These were the communal burial places of the dead. So this is the kind of evidence we have to look at. And sometimes we do find evidence for unhealed injuries. So we have a massive, it's just a replica, but we have a massive hole to the head here that shows no evidence of healing. We do find injuries like this from this period.
Prehistoric battle sites are littered with arrowheads and artifacts, providing evidence of fierce fighting. So one possibility is that the people buried at Stonehenge were a band of warriors, or victims of a prehistoric battle. Mike also has another theory. Amongst the cremated bones of the bodies found at Stonehenge, his team has unearthed two ancient clues that suggest the group buried there held a very different role in Stone Age society.
We can see from the remains of the staff, these bone mounts, that it fitted on the end like this. The wood, of course, had long disappeared. But this gives us an idea of the sort of person who would have possessed one of these items at that time in prehistory. So if we wanted to find a modern parallel, then we should be thinking of a scepter or even a mace of the sort used for the opening of Parliament. The presence of a mace head in one of the burials at Stonehenge indicates that that man was a person of authority.
The second find gives an even more precise insight into who the Stonehenge dead could be.
One of the other grave goods was a small pottery cup or disc which had burning on one side. It may well be an incense burner. So this provides a second clue, which is that they may have had some religious role or religious or ritual authority.
If Mike is right, these bones may be the remains of a religious order or spiritual leaders of the Stone Age. But in the meantime, Christie has been making progress in the lab, which could disprove both theories. This unremarkable-looking fragment has a unique characteristic which will determine whether it belonged to a man or a woman.
The second most commonly represented bone that we have been able to identify is the occipital bone. We have several samples here. It is a bone that's situated at the very back of your skull, and we can easily sample these because they are a much larger fragment.
By passing each occipital bone through a CAT scanner, a sophisticated X-ray image will allow Mike's research team to accurately gauge the bone's thickness, a reliable indicator of gender.
So here we have the first occipital bone coming through.
It's right at the back of the head. Yes, that's all these different slices, isn't it?
That's right, that the CT
CAT
scan makes. But you can see as it's coming through the sharp rise, predominant
yes.
ridge that is happening. If we stop it here,
Right.
it abruptly drops off. And this is where all the muscles are coming from the back
Yeah.
to attach onto this ridge.
So that's to be expected with a typical male then.
That's correct, yes.
The next specimen they analyze is quite different.
So here we have the female occipital coming up.
Yes.
And we can see as it's coming through slice by slice, the rise is very, very gentle.
Right, yes.
And then it just gently slopes off.
So that means we're not really looking at a cemetery of monks or male warriors.
Yeah.
Despite the discovery of what might be religious artifacts, in Mike's experience, finding women's remains along with the men's means it's unlikely that the Stonehenge dead were a religious order. And just as unlikely that they were members of an army.
It's difficult to be utterly categorical, but as a generalization, it's unusual to find religious orders where you've got men and women together. Or, for example, warrior battalions where you've got men and women together. The mix of sexes would suggest that those are unlikely scenarios.
So who could the Stonehenge dead possibly be? The barrage of lab tests on the bones is coming to an end. A total of 63 bodies have been recovered from the monument. Not just men and women, but children too. So what does this mean to Mike? The results of the carbon dating tests will allow him to interpret their relationship to each other.
What I think we might be looking at is a community, men, women and children, from some sort of special selection process. You could use the word aristocracy, an elite. What's very interesting here is that they're buried as a community. If it's families, it's several families. And that tells us something really interesting about the organization of not just megalith building, but people's general lives at this time. This isn't a society of individuals. This is a society that's communal to a much greater extent than perhaps we'd realized.
The results show a series of regular burials of men, women and children between 3000 and 2800 BC. If Mike is right, these people were part of a Stone Age aristocracy. Their remains cremated, their graves marked by the ring of blue stones. The most important prehistoric families immortalized at Britain's most celebrated prehistoric monument. But why here? What's so special about the Stonehenge location, a windswept slope on Salisbury Plain, that a prehistoric aristocracy was honored here in such an elaborate way? Mike has been investigating some of the monument's best-known features to see if they can help solve the mystery, starting with Stonehenge's alignment to the sun.
Looking at this model, you can get a real sense of why Stonehenge has been one of the most debated monuments of the ancient world. It's a massive, great edifice. And of course, the other important aspect is its solstice alignments. So in the one direction, we're aligned on the midsummer sunrise, and 180 degrees in the opposite direction, the sun setting.
Visitors to Stonehenge today at midsummer and midwinter can still see that the sunrise and sunset are perfectly aligned through the central stones, and it's no coincidence. The monument was clearly built with this in mind.
The solstices were significant because this was a means of timekeeping. They define important moments in the solar cycle, and particularly at midwinter, the transition from the old year to the new. It's been no surprise to us to see that, well, throughout the Neolithic period, the 4th and 3rd millennia BC, there are monuments which have orientations towards either sunrise or sunset on midwinter solstice.
In fact, many monuments were built with this orientation in prehistoric times. But Mike had a hunch that the Stonehenge location possessed a natural feature that made it very different from other prehistoric sites. The evidence came when he started to investigate the ancient thoroughfare leading to the monument.
This is the Stonehenge Avenue, the processional route into Stonehenge, and it consists of a ditch on either side and a bank, and there's another bank that runs parallel with it.
The avenue has since grown over and can now only really be seen from the air, but it's long been accepted that it was once a wide processional route to the monument cut into the slope. What makes this avenue particularly special is that it was here before Stonehenge was built, and it wasn't man-made. Mike believes that naturally occurring straight ridges formed by water melting at the end of the last ice age had created distinct parallel lines in the chalky soil. In an ancient landscape, these straight lines would have seemed astonishing to Stone Age people, particularly when they realized what they seemed to be pointing at.
By an extraordinary cosmological coincidence, this alignment in that direction is towards the midwinter solstice sunset, so this must have seemed like an extraordinary message from the gods. It may well have possibly been the center of their universe.
In a world without watches, clocks, or calendars, a place where the longest and shortest days were marked by a natural feature would have seemed more than just a coincidence. For Stone Age people, this would have seemed a very special place, the perfect location to build a cemetery for their most important citizens. And this is how Stonehenge originally came about, and how it looked for 500 years. So how did it become the Stonehenge we know today? For 500 years, Stonehenge looked like this. Then a second phase of building took place. Huge stones called sarsens were dragged from quarries 20 miles away and placed here, totally transforming its appearance.
Now, to put up something like this must have taken a very large workforce. So this is one of the greatest monuments in the whole of prehistoric Europe.
In all, 2,000 tons of stone were quarried, carved, dragged, and erected to complete this phase of construction, giving the monument the iconic appearance we know today. Archaeologists have traditionally focused on the colossal engineering task involved in completing this second phase of construction. But Mike Parker Pearson and his team now know that there was much more to this incredible engineering story after they made a discovery just 3 miles from the monument. At a location called Durrington Walls, a dig revealed a truly stunning archaeological treasure trove. The remains of a 4,500-year-old village, along with a staggering 80,000 animal bones, building tools, pottery bowls, and drinking vessels. It turned out to be evidence of the largest Stone Age settlement in northwest Europe, within walking distance of Stonehenge. The bones of slaughtered livestock found at Durrington are in the lab for analysis. A remarkable pattern is emerging based on what time of year they were slaughtered.
Pig teeth erupt, which means they come through the jaw and out into the mouth at specific times during the animal's life. So by looking at which teeth are erupted, we can start to determine how old the animal was when it died. We can then work out that they were killed first winter of their lives.
Analysis of the teeth shows that after a spring birth, most of the livestock were being slaughtered around midwinter.
What the animal bones are telling us is that Durrington Walls was no ordinary settlement lived in all year round. There are specific moments in the year when people were consuming those cattle and pigs and bringing their animals, not so much bring a bottle as bring a cow or bring a pig. We know that they are there for the midsummer and the midwinter. Times that we know were embodied in the architecture of Stonehenge itself.
This evidence showed that animals were being slaughtered to mark the midwinter solstice at Stonehenge. And this was happening at exactly the same time as the second phase of building at the monument. So Durrington was effectively a builder's camp servicing Stonehenge's construction, where numbers swelled around the solstice and workers downed tools to celebrate. Thousands of fragments of pottery were also unearthed at Durrington. These are now in the lab, and the remains of prehistoric meals tell a story of feasting on a grand scale.
It's only recently that people have really started to think about what pots were actually used for. And that's because we have new methods of analysis that allows us to get out the foods that have absorbed into the ceramic surface during its use.
Dr. Oliver Craig is using existing technology designed to analyse the nutritional content of supermarket foods to build up a detailed picture of exactly how people at Stonehenge were feasting 4,500 years ago.
So when you see a packet of crisps, you see the amount of fat that's written on the side, for example. How they've decided that, how they determine that, is exactly the same method we use to analyse these pots. And these are the actual ranges based on authentic products that we know are pig or beef or a dairy fat. And what you can see here, these little blue dots. So each of these is a separate molecule that was deposited on the pot during its use. I mean, what you're seeing here then is obviously different types of culinary activities going on at this site. Yeah. So animals have been selected for different types of cuisine, if you like. So basically the pigs are ending up on the barbecue. The actual pots are being used to process the kind of minority, the cattle products.
Boiled beef, barbecued pork. What's interesting is that this shows a contrast with their everyday life. This is going to a huge, great party, a massive feast, and eating yourself silly. The debris we found, they were throwing away entire racks of ribs. They hadn't even bothered to chew each one individually.
Midwinter feasting meant cooking and eating meat on a completely different scale from the everyday prehistoric diet. Now we know what the Stonehenge revellers were eating at their midwinter celebration. But what were they drinking?
We can find all sorts of other traces in those residues. So whether there's been milk in there or various types of meat, but alcohol itself leaves no trace. All we can say is we would expect them to have a thorough knowledge of the properties of yeast because of 1,000 years of working with cereals. So I would hope that for their sakes, they're actually fermenting alcohol.
It's a vivid picture of feasting on an epic scale. But the size of these celebrations have thrown up a puzzle for Mike and his team. The population of the area around Stonehenge was thought to be relatively small. So where was everyone coming from? In another scientific first, Mike's team is now analysing the animal teeth from Durrington at an atomic level. And amazingly, this ingenious process can reveal where the builders and revellers came from.
Teeth are very important to us because they incorporate elements that can tell us something about an animal's diet. Now, the first thing we have to do is we take the tooth out and we clean off the surfaces and we cut a section out of the tooth. And then with these large teeth, in fact, we then cut a very small fragment out of the tooth. And this is the kind of sample that we'd actually work on. It's a tiny little piece of clean enamel. What we do with that is we dissolve it up in a chemistry laboratory, and then we're able to separate the strontium from all the other elements in that tooth that we don't want. So when we as archaeologists come to look at the composition of the teeth, we can use the isotope composition of the strontium to tell us something about where the animal spent the time during which its teeth were formed.
Strontium isotopes vary from place to place, and each one has a unique fingerprint. These atoms get into the diet through drinking water, becoming locked in the teeth and bones. Laboratory analysis can show where an individual animal came from, and therefore how far their owners were prepared to travel to take part in the Stonehenge celebrations.
So that's the strontium isotope map of Britain.
Yes, and this shows the different isotope compositions of strontium that you'll find across Britain.
So Durrington Walls is here, isn't it, on the blue?
Yes, on the pale blue. So any animal that was grazed in that area, or
that's chalk, isn't
chalk,
it, the blue? Yes.
Or nearby.
We'd expect green and blue for the majority of our animals,
Absolutely.
wouldn't we?
But if we bring up the Durrington Walls data, you'll see.
Yes. Look at all these oranges and reds. So where do you think they come from?
Well, they have to come from further afield. If we look at this map, the area that can provide those sort of values is predominantly Scotland. And that's because the very old rocks in Scotland generate these high values.
That's the other end of the country.
Yes, it
from
is.
Stonehenge. That is really quite extraordinary.
Yes, yes.
This revolutionary process reveals an extraordinary fact: that people were coming from all over Britain in order to work and feast at Stonehenge. Mike believes that some of the visitors may have been coming from as far as Orkney at the northernmost tip of the British Isles.
The cattle bones, the pottery styles, these show us that this apparently remote archipelago of islands in Orkney was related or linked with Stonehenge. That's some 700 miles away. To travel that distance by foot and by boat is going to take you a month. It's a very long way. Even today, it takes the best part of a whole day to get between the two. So if they're moving back and forwards, that is really quite an undertaking. These are really quite substantial trips with animals heading south to all meet up.
The fact that people were coming to Stonehenge from all over the British Isles points to a remarkable possibility. that the monument was regarded as the central gathering place of prehistoric Britain. Based on evidence from the Durrington Walls dig, Mike has estimated that up to 4,000 people were involved in midwinter celebrations at Stonehenge. A huge proportion of a British population that probably numbered just tens of thousands. Midwinter feasting at Stonehenge might just have been the first example of a united British cultural event. Mike now has a detailed picture of the typical midwinter celebrations based on his findings. He believes that the festivities would begin at the builders' camp at Durrington. Extravagant celebrations would take place, and then revellers would form a procession up the avenue leading to Stonehenge, the most important burial site in the whole of Britain. There they would pay respect to the dead and observe the winter solstice sunset through the aligned stones.
This would have been an extraordinary event because previously there'd never been such a widely drawn gathering. This is of a different order of magnitude, and you can just imagine the excitement. We haven't seen anything like this on that scale before.
Stonehenge was by far the most important monument in the country, attracting people from far and wide to work, celebrate and worship. But its days as the communal centre of Britain were numbered. In a matter of years, something would happen that would change British civilization forever. Analysis of the animal bones and pots left over from the feasting show that there was an abrupt end to the festivities, and the settlement at Durrington Walls became a ghost town.
We know from precise radiocarbon dating that the village here was occupied for a period of less than 45 years, somewhere around 2500 BC.
Stonehenge was no longer the communal centre of Britain, and activity around the site appeared to stop. So what was the cause of this prehistoric mystery? Around 2500 BC, Stonehenge was the centre of communal festivities in Britain. For almost 50 years, people came from far and wide to enjoy extravagant midwinter feasts. These activities then came to an abrupt end. What was the cause of this dramatic change in the customs of an entire nation? Mike Parker Pearson believes the answers have been buried with the remains of a warrior for thousands of years. Discovered close to the monument, these excavated bones are quite different from the tiny fragments from previous burials. These bones have not been cremated.
This is one of the most famous prehistoric burials. He is the Amesbury archer, and he represents a sea change in the funerary practices of prehistoric Britain. This must have been not just an important individual, but a very large funeral. Before this, people were cremated and buried without grave goods. He, as you can see, is buried with over 100 grave goods. He's the richest burial from this period.
These very different burial traditions don't just signify a social change. They point to the appearance of a completely new people in Britain, known by archaeologists as the Beaker people.
He's called a beaker burial because of these distinctive types of pottery. It's a kind of pottery that we don't find in Britain until after the big sarcens were put up at Stonehenge, so after 2500 BC.
This new culture still respected Stonehenge. In fact, they reserved the area around the monument for their most important burials. but there was a definite change in the way they honoured their dead.
This is a round barrow. It's a burial mound from the time of the Beaker people, and it dates to about 2000 BC. This is actually a place where the body unburnt is buried, and then a mound is constructed over the top of it. We know that Stonehenge was important for the Beaker people. The barrows are set on the skyline all around it, just like those that we can see up amongst those trees. So they're a visible testament to the significance that Stonehenge had for them hundreds of years after it was built.
But the way the Beaker people positioned their dead shows a marked difference from earlier funeral practices. The 63 Stonehenge cremations were placed in a circle, with no greater emphasis on one grave than another. But the Beaker people commemorated their dead in a completely different way.
Unlike the 63 cremations from Stonehenge, who were buried within one single monument, this will have been built initially for one person.
This new people placed much more emphasis on the individual than the communal. So who were the mysterious Beaker people, and where did they come from? The fact that they did not cremate their dead is a gift for Mike's research team. Because the remains are unburnt, scientists can now successfully pinpoint the chemical isotopes in the teeth and bones, which will shed light on the origins of the Beaker people. In the biggest study ever on prehistoric remains, Mike's team is unlocking the secrets of 360 Beaker bodies found buried in the UK.
What we're doing is extracting traces of different chemical elements that will give us information about the type of climate people were living in, the type of geology they were living on, the environment, and the types of foods that they were eating. And with all that evidence, we can then reconstruct their environment. We can look at one individual and say, is this individual of local origin, or have they come from somewhere else?
The results will reveal to Mike where the enigmatic Beaker people came from. Starting with the most famous, the Amesbury Archer.
The Amesbury Archer is very unusual within our group of over 300 individuals within Britain. His results show that he grew up in a cold and continental climate. So that's not Britain, but Europe, most likely in an area around the Alps.
It seems the Amesbury Archer came from continental Europe. His tooth analysis reveals isotopes found mainly in alpine areas, meaning he spent the earlier part of his life around what is now the French-Swiss border. So was he part of a foreign invasion which took hold of Britain by force? Other results show a much more intriguing scenario.
Right, so this is our man from Shrewton. What do we know about his strontium isotopes?
Well, they would suggest that he grew up on the South Downs, really, on the chalk.
So in fact, he could be a local lad.
Yeah.
Analysis shows many of the other Beaker people were born and bred in Britain. It seems they took on the trappings of Beaker culture. The other results seem to confirm this trend. It looks like the ancient Britons adopted these new continental ways as their own. So what was it about the Beaker culture that seduced them and made them turn their back both on Stonehenge and their age-old traditions? Mike thinks the answer lies among the grave goods found in Beaker burials.
The second interesting item is the dagger. It's made out of copper. So beautiful, shiny new material, metal, Nobody had seen this before in Britain. It's a very small knife, and it's not the sort of thing that's going to be a very effective weapon. So this is going to have been as much an item of status as of sheer practical utility. It's state of the art.
This new import must have had a profound impact on the people who first encountered it. For thousands of years, the ancient Britain's culture had been based on stone, rudimentary tools, and crude weapons. To them, the glittering, workable, beautiful metal that the beakers brought to these shores would have seemed almost magical. And it would change the very way their society worked.
It's copper and it's gold. And once you've got those metals, you can show off. This is the arrival of the bling culture.
For Mike, this is the culmination of 30 years of pioneering research. The beaker bodies have given him the last piece of the jigsaw. Just after 2500 BC, their new individualistic culture and their shiny new material goods seem to have brought a fundamental change to ancient Britain. It swept away the communal culture that had once united people from all over these isles in great solstice feasts. And with that culture went Stonehenge. The beaker people's arrival put an end to the Stone Age and ushered in the Bronze Age. But it also seems to have changed the very way we related to each other. As Stonehenge fell into ruin, the age of the individual had arrived.
How human beings lived nearly 1,000 years before the pyramids, Iceman murder mystery, Wednesday night from 9 on More 4. Next tonight on Channel 4, Slick and Original, a wonder drug that gives you 100% brain power, dark side effects a given. Bradley Cooper, Robert De Niro, Limitless.